Thank you, Jenny, and hi to everybody. This project is called WaterMARKE, which is water, mitigating agricultural impacts through research and knowledge exchange. And it came from a previous EPA-funded project called Ag Impact, which was run by Donncha Doody and Owen Carton, whom some of you may know. And they finished their project by saying, the research is great, but we have to work harder to try to get the implementation as well. So this project was very much a multidisciplinary team of socioeconomic, myself and colleagues in Teagasc and University of Galway, the psychologists in University of Galway, biophysical scientists in Teagasc, in Johnstown Castle, and also some spatial research. The key to all of this and the glue that pulls together what I'm going to talk about today is ASSAP, because ASSAP was the advisory and the knowledge exchange component. In the bits of research that I'm going to talk to you about, there are three components: farmer behaviour, advisor behaviour, and the whole system behaviour. Very quickly, an early piece of research that we did looked at the change in status in high status areas. And I think this graphic in particular just gives an insight into the complexity. Everybody talks about water quality and complexity. And when you see the amount of flux in and out of high status, you start, and then differences between different parts of the country and different soil types, elevations, everything. It really kind of brings home that complexity and why we need the advisory approaches that we have. In terms of behaviour, all humans behave in the same way, and we're all driven by the same things, and they're simple. There's PBC, which is perceived behavioural control. So it's about knowledge and it's about skills. And do individuals, in this case farmers, think that they have the necessary knowledge and skills to take on a measure that you're proposing to them? So, for any of us, if there's some big task that you should do, are you the first to put your hand up to do it unless you feel that you can actually do it? No, nobody wants to be the clown who gets things wrong first time. So that's where the knowledge and the advice comes in. Costs are always a problem for us. And the work that we did in this project showed that there's a huge range of costs. It's not just upfront costs. There are transaction costs. In other words, if you want farmers to take on measures, then they probably have to do training. And then that's a cost for Teagasc to provide the training, or for the consultants. It's also a cost for farmers to give up their time to go and do the training. We don't always think of these things. Social or subjective norms, again, bring it back to yourself. If I do this, will the neighbours think I'm stupid, or will they think it's a good thing to do? And again, we know ourselves what the answer to that is. Attitudes, we can either have positive or negative attitudes. We find mostly in the research that attitudes are tricky in terms of behaviour, because our attitudes tend to be quite deeply held, and because they're deeply held, they're not as easy to change as some of the other behavioural drivers. One piece of work that we looked at early on, we looked at 5 specific measures around water quality, and we did the behavioural drivers of those was part of a survey of 1,009 nationally representative survey around the country. Knowledge and farmer norms are the consistently strong drivers across all the 5 measures. Costs in this case were also a driver, and a negative driver, but to a lesser extent, except in the case of upfront costs. Upfront costs are an upfront barrier. Actually, somebody said to me recently, there's no such thing as a barrier. It's just really good reasons why you shouldn't do something. What this research showed is we looked at the behavioural drivers of each measure individually, and we also looked at the behavioural drivers of all the 5 measures together. And it's statistically plausible. If you have information about the attributes of those measures, you can actually look at bundles of measures together if they have the same attributes. And it means that theoretically, you may not have to interview 1,009 farmers about 5 individual measures, that once they have bundled attributes, you don't have to do as much data collection, which is expensive and takes time. So that's a published paper, and I give you the links to the reports at the end. But that's a kind of a precursor about the behavioural end of it within ASSAP, and I'd like to acknowledge my colleague Noel Meehan here. He's the Head of Water Quality Knowledge Transfer in Teagasc, who was very instrumental and a co-author in all of this research as well. At the time that we looked at the ASSAP data set, there were over 3,000 farm assessments done. There were basically about loss of pea and sediment pesticides use, 5.1 measures on average across since 2018 had been identified per farm at that stage. And again, you have the same categorisation of the measures, the nutrient management planning, the land and the farm. And I have to, again, congratulate ASSAP for the depth and the breadth of the data that they have collected. So there are farm and farm characteristics, as you would imagine, but there's also, and what was really important and useful for us, is that they have data on each of the measures in each of the different contexts, what issues they relate to, what risks they relate to, and more importantly, they have data on measures that are started, are ongoing, and are completed. So in behavioural terms, there are two kind of ways that you can look at behaviour. One is stated preference. So a stated preference is a survey. I ask you, what will you do in the future if X, Y, and Z? You tell me what you will do. The other and more comprehensive way to do analysis, if you have it, is if you have a data set that reveals or gives you a revealed preference of what the individuals actually did in a given context. So that's the really important thing that allowed us to do the behavioural data analysis. And we looked at what are the opportunities to maybe help ASSAP or to simplify things, can we cluster measures, what really are the ASSAP behavioural drivers the same as the literature would say. And we had two ways to look at that in terms of behavioural economics, looking and analysing the actual data, and also from a psychology perspective, which was done largely through interviews. One of the things that we were able to do, following on from that first behavioural driver that showed us that the subjective norms and the knowledge are the key drivers consistently across the 5 water quality measures. What we did was we characterised in ASSAP, Noel will correct me now, but because you have different measures to deal with different combinations of risk and environmental context, there are over 300 actual discrete measures. Some of them are quite similar, and the same measure might be applied in a different context, but it has to be applied in a different way. So again, we're coming back to the complexity, but there are over 300 of them. So we were able to, with expert opinion, characterise each measure in terms of, from a behavioural perspective, was the behavioural requirement low, medium or high? From a social norms perspective or farmer norms, do other farmers think it's a good thing to do, an okay thing to do, or wouldn't have anything to do with it? And then in terms of costs, low, medium or high as well. So that allowed us then to look at the started, the ongoing and the completed measures within those parameters. We looked, here it gives you the combination of the different measures and actions. And first we looked at what are the most common, we did a kind of a straight analysis of the data and the most common issues, the top 20 issues identified. And you can see pea loss through overland flow, drinking points, buffers, implementation of NMP, organic manure, timing, location, high risk, low risk. And when we actually came down to do all the regressions and the analysis on it, the key kind of things that came out were livestock were less likely than tillage farms to have started the measures. Dairy farms had the highest level of engagement across all farms. Overall, there was actually a very high level of engagement. It's up in the 80s across the board on average. It's up into the 90s for dairy, but that may well be because there were dedicated dairy advisors, whereas the ASSAP advisors largely cover beef, sheep and tillage. The farmers in the catchments with diffuse losses are less likely to have engaged versus the farmers in catchments with point source. And I guess that's, point source is obviously a more obvious thing, and it may be easier to get your head around what happened and how it happened compared to diffuse, which could happen. It happens in a kind of a black box, and does anybody really understand how it happens? This, I'm talking from a farmer's perspective, not a researcher's. Farmers who are participants in agri-environment schemes are more likely to have started and completed. And this is likely because they're more used to having to do measures under reps or AOS or acres. They understand this is a process, you're asked to do this, you do it, and you get paid, and there's a good result at the end. And this is something that came out of the nationally representative survey, but it's really important, and it's very important in the context of what Nolene and Pat have been talking about. And this project started in 2008 when all of this was just starting. And it's just so great to sit and listen to the two of you and hear everything that has happened, because we'll say WaterMARKE finished about a year and a half ago at this stage. If farmers live in a catchment where there's an awareness of a measure, and they're located in areas where measures have already been implemented, there's a much higher likelihood of their intention to take up on measures. So again, it kind of comes back to the social norms and the knowledge in a different way. And hopefully the more that measures are taken up in catchments, and the more that other farmers see them being taken up and realise that it's not stupid, it works, it's a good thing to do, then all of us, familiarity makes us more confident. And it was just interesting that came out of the nationally representative survey. One of the things we really wanted to do in ASSAP was, because of those 300 measures and because of the complexity that I showed you in the first map, is there any way to simplify this down so that you could learn lessons that we could apply to mainstream advisors who don't have that technical, built-up capacity that water quality advisors have? And the answer is no. There were absolutely no trends. There were thousands of observations in the data set, and there were absolutely no trends that you could say, in this type of catchment, in this soil type, for N loss, you apply A, B, and C. No. It ain't that simple. And most of you in this room know that is the case. And a lot of what I'm telling you is intuitive, and we all actually know these things. But I guess what this project does is, the research states and the analysis states, and it's all statistically significant. So we're in a position to be able to put money behind that and resources behind it, and know that, what the likely outcome is going to be. Interestingly, also from an ASSAP perspective, in behavioural terms, measures that have a high knowledge requirement, so 3 on the PBC knowledge scale, generally in the research, there's a lower likelihood that they will be adopted. ASSAP flips that, and to us it means that because you have these dedicated advisors who take time out on the farm with farmers to explain the importance of this particular, if he's doing in practice that maybe causes a risk and he doesn't realise, and the ASSAP advisor can explain what's happening and how this could possibly go wrong and what we need to do to remediate it. So it kind of brings home that situation that, particularly in the priority areas for action, where you have a bigger need and maybe a more urgent need to change water quality, that ASSAP dedicated approach is warranted. And again, that's another published paper. A lot of the behavioural psychology stuff was done in terms of interviews. They found that larger farms have a higher behavioural readiness to adopt a measure. So in other words, in their heads, the bigger farms are quicker to say, yes, I can do that. Livestock systems, lower behavioural readiness. Farmers who are involved in activities that contribute to diffuse P losses, they have a lower behaviour. It's an understanding issue. There's a gap in their knowledge in terms of water quality, and I don't blame them. It's taken me years to get my head around what diffuse losses are and why they're different in different places. And I would imagine that, there are a lot of advisors around the place and a lot of people who work with water quality who don't 100% get all the scientific knowledge behind it. So if the farmers, it's not their fault that this is complex stuff and it changes on every farm. On farms where there's a high risk of diffuse end losses, and a lot of these would be dairy farms. They may have adequate physical resources, but they face challenges in terms of the skills and new practices, and that's your perceived behavioural control. You know, I just not 100% sure how to do this, so I'll back away from it for a while. And they also need more peer and professional supports, advisory supports. This is now the farmers themselves saying this. It's farmer behavioural readiness is higher where there's good engagement with advisors and where the farmers themselves have agricultural education. And the farmers that were interviewed within and outside of ASSAP, they're in general positively motivated to improve water quality, but they say that they don't understand it well enough themselves and they need supports in relation to knowledge and also in relation to resources. But they see advisors as highly trusted sources of information, and there's an important role here for mainstream advisors in terms of not getting into the whole technicality of water quality and water quality issues, but in terms of having enough knowledge to be able to highlight to clients when they're out on farms, you know, there could be a risk here now and we need to look into something, and, you know, I'll get a specialist to talk to you, or you should come to this meeting or whatever, and you'd find out more information. Advisors, both conventional Teagasc advisors and non-Teagasc advisors, they all highlight barriers that represent both the knowledge and technical challenges. So for all of us, you know, if you were focused on tillage and conventional tillage and tillage crops, water quality is a separate complex area that you may not be 100% sure of. If you're not confident, if you don't feel you don't know enough about something, we're all slow to bring it up and to ask farmers to talk about it. So I think there's a job of work to be done, and a lot of it has already started, but even more so if you know, be very difficult to train up every advisor to the standard that ASSAP advisors are trained to. But at the same time, the more mainstream and general advisors who have more confidence, they're more likely to bring it up with farmers and to say, you know, we just need to be careful here. But advisors also say that they have administrative burdens. So in other words, if water quality isn't your top priority, you might want to do this, and you might want to develop your knowledge, and you might want to go to farm walks, and you might want to go to training courses, but 9 times out of 10, something else lands on your desk that is your top priority, and you end up dealing with that. And this is coming now from the mouths of advisors and farmers themselves. From a system perspective, and Nolene talked a lot about this, and I won't go into it much, it's something that we worked on when we started the project in 2018. LawPro was up and running. ASSAP was only it wasn't even in infancy stage fully at that stage. And they were the big things that were happening in terms of water quality. When we went back and looked at the sector from a kind of an environmental and an innovation system perspective to see who was doing what, how many people were working collaboratively together. There's a much wider range of actors involved in water quality, you know, and a greater exchange of data between the people involved in the sector, and the systemic collaboration. And there's a really nice, Joan Martin and David Wallace are in the audience here, and they feature in a little video, but it's a really nice short video of a collaboration between LawPro, where Joan goes out and identifies the problem. She passes it on to David, who goes and he talks to the farmers, and then the farmers get involved themselves and put in measures. But it's just a really nice collaboration, and it kind of, to me, it epitomizes the change in what has happened since 2018 across the innovation system. And nowadays, this is what the innovation system looks like, as opposed to that small little figure with, you know, about 10 or 12 players in it. There's everybody and anybody in agriculture and in community and in environment involved in agriculture. And as Pat spoke about the Better Farming for Water, you see all the different agencies that are involved there. The graphic on the left represents the areas that the NAPE inspectors are working in. So a huge amount has happened. And I go past the summary because it's just summary again. There's further potential to learn from the ASSAP data set. We need to focus more on differential knowledge for differential problems like N and P. They're completely different problems. Some farms have both, most farms don't. We need to look at, in terms of costs, something that could be collected in future in ASSAP is not just in terms of is the cost low, medium or high, but does this particular farmer, is it a big, a medium or a small burden for him or her to take on that measure? Would be really useful to know in terms of the likelihood of adoption. We should be promoting measures that have multiple benefits. You go through the ASSAP list and there are many measures in there that look at greenhouse gases, biodiversity, as well as water quality. And we should be promoting those measures that kind of have more bang for buck, and improve mainstream advisor knowledge and confidence. And just, I think these, the what you call the slides are going to be circulated, but just the EPA research report is there on there's a website, www.teagasc.ie/watermark, and that has links to all the papers and the two final reports as well. Thanks, Gurmav, everybody.